Which brings me on to the sustainability in the corporate sector.
I have two questions before you do that. Actually, I'll ask one and I'll save one for another time. I assume when you were given this huge pile of paperwork to do, you also didn't get paid overtime for it. That's also very common. Your boss telling you they want something, but they're not paying you for it.
You know what they used to say? They say, you get paid. It was a well-paying job at the time, in fairness. You get paid enough, don't complain. You should be grateful you got a job. That's what they meant. And this was in one of the...
Which I don't want to... Something I would believe more now, because we have such a crisis. If you turn around and said you'd be grateful to have a well-paying job, you might be like, 2023, England, yeah, maybe I should be grateful. But back then, everyone was working. It was a better society. I think it was under the Labour government as well. It was fruitful in England. So grateful for what? You're treating me like shit.
Well, I'm not going to name the company because it is a major corporation.
Do you want me to say it? Write it down.
No. I'm not going to say it. Just to get your former colleagues or whatever. But this was the way, right? And then we all became a beneficiary of that. You know, things like your productivity time, and now, of course, with COVID, it's changed a lot. So you have that refresh on a bigger scale because dissemination and spreading ideas is 1,000,000 times more effective and easier. One example, if you want to look at with the Sustainable Development Goals, is that they're being strict. They're not saying we need to reduce hunger. They're saying zero hunger. Okay? Good. We're saying zero poverty now. But this is now such a movement because of trends from Gen Z, and I'm going to talk about Gen Z and George Floyd in a sec. It's such a movement that corporations, major corporations, by the way, were at One Young World, and I had the opportunity to put some pressure and heat on some of the big players and representatives from there to have those powerful conversations. They're making all these changes now, not just to whitewash, but to actually change their practices. And if you look at the definition of sustainability, living and operating today whilst not sacrificing, tomorrow's resources or the future of the world, basically. It's interesting to see that transition. I'm going to give you that stat now. So Forbes, you've heard of Forbes, the big company. In 2018, they put out a very, very controversial stat saying that new generation and Generation Z in particular, they see, because there's this kind of they have less discretionary income, let's say Gen Z, they were quite young at the time, they have less discretionary income. So what they do is they see their purchases as investments in causes, and they will boycott a particular firm if they are deemed to be unethical in any way, shape or form. So it brought out a lot of controversy that, wow, this Gen Z, their purchasing power is now in contention because they will make purchases based on ethics. Massive news for the whole UN Sustainable Development Goals, because at the end of the day, I remember when I was at university and I was graduated, it was just all it was get a good job, no problem, get a great job and go and live your life, okay? Buy a house, whatever you want to do. Now, young people, they're going to university worried about how difficult their living and working conditions will be because of this climate crisis, right? This is kind of one thing that I want to allude to. So they really care. Since Forbes, loads of other companies have come out and said, look, this isn't a small issue. This is a major issue and we need to kind of change. At One Young World, there was a former child slave, okay, that had been in slavery for so many years of her life, undocumented birth. I think she's from India. She had been kept working, I think there's 40 million child slaves in the world right now. And we had a workshop with her, and she basically just asked us all, said, do you know, who knows where their clothes come from, where they were made? And when she asked that question, everybody in the room was kind of shocked, thinking, well, I know it's made from Top Man or whatever. And she said, do you know when you go and buy a top in Primark or wherever for 7-8 quid, it is impossible to make a product of that clothing, that quality, for that price, that someone somewhere, or many people, have basically been not paid incorrectly or subjugated to things like child slavery. And again, 40 million child slaves in the world. She, from the age of, I think, 7 or 8, was working 10, 15 hours a day. And you could tell that she'd been through a hard time.
How old was she at the time when she's speaking to you?
She was, I think they did some research into her age. She was in her 30s.
When was she saved from the slavery?
I don't know the details of her story, but I know that One Young World picked her up, and her story has inspired the major corporations.
Can I ask you something? Was she a lucky person who was picked up, or did they save a bunch of people? Do you know that context?
I don't know the context, but I know that she, in like a dramatic way, was managed to be saved. But I think she was one of few, and is still, as I said, 40 million child slaves. And the way this industry is so underexplored is because it fits the narratives of major corporations in terms of the clothing industry not to highlight this. And I'm coming on to the shifts that we're seeing now. So IKEA, everyone knows IKEA, picks up on this. And the CEO and directors of IKEA were there. They kind of started to look into their own practices. What does everyone buy when they go to IKEA? Oh, everyone likes to buy these cushions. You know, they hug them when they're watching a film or whatever. And one of the things that came out of that talk was that we need to cut the gap between the consumer and the producer. Because if you know how whatever you're buying is produced, again, jumping onto the Gen Z momentum and the SDGs, then you're going to purchase more sustainably and more consciously.
Ethically.
Yeah, more ethically as well. With those cushions, I think they found out that they make them in Jordan, and the first kind of step was to find a way to create that connection between the consumer and the producer. So the people making those cushions, not only would they be now given better working conditions, all the relevant things in terms of ethics, but they would be given the extra time to stitch their initials on that cushion. So when you're sat in England or New York or America or wherever, and you're hugging that cushion in a scary film, you're connecting with that person, right? That's minor, but then you look at other areas.
At least you know that it was built, made ethically.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a major step in itself, considering that a lot of our clothes, £8 pieces or fast fashion, 30p t-shirts or whatever, these are all
countries like Pretty Little Thing. Not countries, companies, sorry.
Companies, yeah. And then Audi picked up on this. So I think a lot of the kids that get kidnapped, like battery pickers, like what you see in Slumdog Millionaire. So they basically went and created a recycling plan for batteries. So they provided their own machinery in India to recycle batteries, and also to take batteries from Europe to recycle them in India, using one of the startups in India itself, so empowering the local people, and then creating solar power chargers to recycle those batteries into power banks that could be used in the night time to give electricity to stalls and also to people who need it at home to study with, etc., building capacity. And they took it further and bought and made electrical rickshaw, those little peewee taxis that you see in India.
Yes.
Electrical of those, but made completely from recyclable materials.
Brilliant.
So we're seeing a complete shift in the sense that for the first time ever, corporations aren't just doing it to whitewash. They're under pressure because their potential customers be lost, or they're going to be buying in to their ideas and visions. So I'm more confident now in terms of I'm looking at things as a long term, because I'm not an engineer. I'm not somebody to say how things will work out or how we'll solve or prevent a Pakistan flood happening. I'm looking at a kind of grander scale, a knowledge dissemination, that things took time, but they will get to the individual, as we saw with the mental health, which is a massive thing. The amount of students who would get chucked out up till, let's say, 2012, 13, 14 for missing a deadline, to the amount of students who are now consolidated in their mental health needs from higher education. Unbelievable. That's life-changing. That student who leaves university because their institution didn't support their mental health, and a lot of them tend to be diaspora again, believe it or not, battling two different cultures or managing two different cultures. This is life-changing because those people then go into the working world. They have a much better life and future. So it will reach, but this time with the SDGs, I think the pressure's higher. Corporations are now looking at things in a completely different way, and we're seeing changes that we've never seen before. Not only that, organizations like the UN, One Young World, they're placing more emphasis, and even the corporate sector now is giving grants to startups to bring new sustainable methods, ways, solutions into each part of the world. It's disastrous in one way, but then it's beautiful in a sense that all of us are bound by this. We're brought together by this challenge that we face of the climate, and it needs all of our solutions and visions. And when you go somewhere like the COP27, or you go to One Young World, you actually see that, you know what, there is a hell of a lot being done, but we just don't see it. Because if we did see that this is the movement, then that also disturbs political systems, the power of the corporate world, the fossil fuel industry, who are spending more money than ever in carrying on and expanding their practices, and also putting down what loads of, all the changes that are taking place, and to put down also the play down the climate crisis. So we're seeing definitely a lot more questioning, a lot more consciousness, more so than we ever have before. So for that reason, I'm very, very optimistic. I'm always optimistic anyway,